Welcome. We'll get started in just 1 minute.
Bienvenidos, comenzaremos en 1 minuto.
Welcome. I'm going to give everyone 1 more minute to join and then we will begin.
Buenas, le voy a dar a todos 1 minuto más para juntarse y luego comenzaremos.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the public presentation of the Kingston Climate Action Plan 2030. I'm going to hand it over to Adriana, who will explain our Spanish interpretation for this evening.
Buenas, ahora vamos a comenzar la reunión del Plan de Acción Climático y le voy a pasar la palabra a Adriana, que va a explicar la interpretación. Hola a todos, mi nombre es Adriana y aquí junto a Eugenia formamos parte del equipo de interpretación en esta reunión. Hi everybody, my name is Adriana and along with my compa Eugenia, we are the interpretation team for today's meeting. La ciudad de Kingston se ha comprometido a la justicia del lenguaje para esta reunión y vamos a interpretar del inglés al español y del español al inglés. The city of Kingston has committed to language justice for this meeting and we will be interpreting from English to Spanish and Spanish to English. Si tienen algún comentario para decir en español, en el chat, por favor, está bienvenida a hacerlo. Y también en la porción de preguntas y respuestas. If any of the Spanish speakers have anything to say in Spanish, you are welcome to use the chat or the question and answer period to do so. La función de interpretación ya está activada. The interpretation function has already been activated. Para acceder a la función desde su computadora, busque el globo en la parte inferior de su pantalla y elija interpretación de idiomas. Luego seleccione su canal preferido de idioma, español o inglés. To access the function from your computer, please find the globe at the bottom of your screen and choose language interpretation. Then select your language channel, Spanish or English. Para acceder a la función desde su teléfono o su tableta, busque los 3 puntos en la parte inferior de su pantalla, toque más y luego interpretación de idiomas y luego puede seleccionar su canal de idiomas y tocar finalizar. Este último paso de finalizar es lo que activa la función. To access a function from your phone or from your tablet, please find the 3 dots at the bottom of the screen, select more, then scroll and find language interpretation. Then select your preferred language channel, Spanish or English, and click Done. This last step, Done, is what activates the function. Si tiene alguna dificultad con la interpretación, por favor, mándele un mensaje a Julie o a Summer por el chat y le ayudarán a resolverlo. If you have any difficulties hearing or with interpretation, please send a message in the chat to Julie or Summer. Solo les recordamos a las personas que están presentando hoy que por favor hablen despacio y si necesitamos vamos a hacer esta señal para poder pedirle que hable despacio. We ask the people presenting today to speak slowly, normal, but just relaxed and slowly take breaths, and you will see us doing this sign if we need you to go a little bit slower. Le pedimos a todos que participen hoy que por favor hablen una persona a la vez, un micrófono. We ask everybody to please speak one at a time, one mic. Y le pedimos a todo el mundo que se quede en el mudo a menos de que sea su turno para hablar, para disminuir distracciones. And we ask everyone to stay on mute unless it is your turn to speak so we can minimize distractions. Entonces, ahora vamos a comenzar la interpretación simultánea. Adelante, Eugenia, comienza con la interpretación simultánea. Now we will start with simultaneous interpretation. Eugenia, please begin simultaneous interpretation. Y con eso le doy las gracias a la ciudad de Kingston por su compromiso a la justicia del lenguaje. Que tengan muy buena reunión.
Okay, thank you so much, Adriana. And thank you so much to the Language Justice Collective of the Hudson Valley for being here. We appreciate that we're able to do this and that you're able to be here. My name is Julie Noble, and I am the Sustainability Coordinator for the City of Kingston. And this is the public presentation of the Draft Climate Action Plan 2030. As Adriana mentioned, I'm going to go through a few logistics for the meeting tonight and then hand it over for the rest of the presentation. This meeting is being recorded and I ask that you remain muted unless you are called on, and you can raise your hand, but we encourage you to use the chat function to type your questions and answers or comments in the chat. And you can do that in Spanish or English. I also want to thank everyone who has helped me to get us to where we are here today. And I'm very excited about the process. So I'm going to hand it over to Mayor Noble to say a few words.
Thank you very much, Julie. And thank you everyone for joining us this evening. Speaking on our climate here in the city of Kingston, this presentation tonight couldn't be better timed. As we know, our world leaders have gathered over the last few weeks to be able to look at global actions that our nations across the world can do to be able to reduce our fossil fuels usage, our greenhouse gas emissions, and further our time on this planet. But we recognize here in the city of Kingston that we also need to act locally, and that our climate action plan that we have developed in partnership with CADMIS and our Climate Smart Kingston commissions are going to really be able to help us have a path forward. I'd like to first thank you, Julie, as our sustainability coordinator for your work and your team, both of staff and volunteers who have helped work to put this plan together. I also want to thank the many community members who participated earlier this year in our public outreach process and who took our surveys and who were so engaged with us as we helped to plot the next 10 years. We are at a pivotal time for climate action, and there's so much climate research that shows that there is so much work to be done that we all need to double down on our efforts. And so I think that everyone will see tonight that this plan does that. It broadens on the amazing work that the city of Kingston has done. As we've talked about before, we are a silver certified climate smart community here in New York State. That's one of the only cities to be able to reach that level, which I'm incredibly proud of, that we've been able to do that. But our plan, as you'll hear, does set out for some really ambitious work. We want to be able to reduce our energy usage by 50% below 2010 levels by 2030. I know we can do it. It's going to take a team effort, and it's going to take a partnership on so many different levels. But I hope that this plan will help guide us. We're really looking forward to hearing everyone's feedback on this plan as we roll out the draft, and making sure that this plan meets with everyone's goals and vision moving forward. And so with that, I want to just thank the team, and I'm going to turn it back over to you, Julie.
Thank you. One more logistic that I want to just mention. When you entered the meeting today, you entered as an attendee, which you are welcome to stay at. As an attendee, you can see what we're seeing, you can hear what we're hearing, but we can't see your name, or you wouldn't be able to speak. We have given you the option to switch to be a panelist. That doesn't mean I'm going to ask you to come here and present. In this case, it just means that your name will show up in the grid of people, and you're welcome to turn your screen on and raise your hand, and you will have a chance to speak. You're welcome to stay as a panelist or an attendee, either way. So we're going to move forward. I do want to just make sure that it is recognized that this process, as the mayor said, is bigger than just the city of Kingston. We would not be possible to be in this place without the incredible amount of work of the Cadmus group that is here, and also Citizens for Local Power, who did an incredible job moving us to this place with community engagement. Without the help of the PAC, which is our project advisory committee, who has provided advice and guidance along the way, and without support of the Novo Foundation. So thank you to all of you. I'm now going to hand it over to Farah Anderson from Cadmus.
Thanks, Julie. Yes, it's a pleasure to be here with all of you this evening. We at Cadmus have been very glad and proud to be able to play a small role in supporting Kingston. So a little bit of background, I'm Farah Anderson, a senior associate at Cadmus Group. I'm joined by my colleague, Megan Lynch, who will introduce herself briefly in a moment. Wanted to just simply share that we have the opportunity to work with a lot of state and local governments around the country on their renewable energy and climate action plans. That's a big part of what we do at Cadmus and on the sustainability and energy team that we are on. And we've been really, again, very pleased to be able to work with Kingston, such a leading city for the last, I think, few years now on both the climate action plan and renewable energy plan. So over to you, Megan, for a brief introduction.
Sure, thanks, Farah. And hi, everyone. My name is Megan Lynch. I am a senior analyst on Cadmus's sustainability and energy team. So as Farah mentioned, mostly work with state and local governments on renewable energy, climate action, and decarbonization planning. And otherwise, I am from New York. I'm based down on Long Island.
Thanks, Megan. Great. So today we wanted to start off with some framing about our objectives. I think the mayor and Julie have touched upon them already in some ways, but just to be very direct about it, the goal of today's meeting is to first and foremost really orient the community to this plan that has just recently been released as a draft a few days ago. So we're going to walk through the different sections and ensure that we're sort of clearly providing an overview of what is included and be able to respond to clarifying questions. We'll get into this more at the end, but we really also want to use today as a setup for the next steps, which really include being able to hear more in-depth feedback from the community. And so we'll share more about the ways to submit your feedback at that time. But again, really using today as a framing, a chance to really understand the key messages, ensure that we can go over clarifying questions so that you as the community are well positioned to send any sort of perhaps deeper, more kind of engaged, meaningful feedback in written format following this meeting, and that will be open for 2 weeks. Again, more details to come at the end of the presentation. So that's sort of our main goals. And similarly, to go to the next slide, we have an agenda that essentially parallels those objectives. We will start off walking through some background and kind of an overview of CAP 2030. That's the Climate Action Plan 2030. We'll then pass over to Julie to hear a little bit more about the great progress to date that this CAP is building upon, and then really launch into what will be our focus today, which is reviewing the CAP 2030 strategies. So that is where we'll really focus our time. We'll pause at a couple of points along the way to ensure that we are responding to questions that might be coming through in the chat. So you might not see a response from us in the chat. You won't see a response from us in the chat immediately, but we will be sort of gathering those questions and try to respond to as many as we can at a couple of key points. And then lastly, we will conclude with next steps as mentioned. So that is our agenda.
1 second, Farah. Eugenia, do you have a question? I saw your hand up for a moment.
No, I don't. It's just my mistake.
No problem. Okay, great. Thank you.
Great. Thanks for checking, Julie. Perfect. So we'll move ahead to the next slide. And this is really where we are launching into the overview of the Climate Action Plan. So moving ahead, we wanted to really set the stage with why do we need a climate action plan? And perhaps for many listening in today, this is stating something that we're all familiar with, but we wanted to just level set to start off. So to start at the very top, greenhouse gases are causing essentially the temperatures to rise on average globally. Causes very much traced to human activity. And this essentially leads to more frequent and more severe climate events that communities around the globe, but including in New York State, are already experiencing. And so these include sea level rise, storms, heavy precipitation, extreme heat. In fact, here pictured on the slide is a photo from a local Kingston paper showing heavy rains after Hurricane Ida, which caused flooding and power outages across southern Ulster and Dutchess counties. So as the mayor said, the city of Kingston is very much recognizing that action needs to happen at all levels, including at the local level, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and that will position the city to do its part in really driving forward for the type of future with the types of health outcomes, well-being, prosperity outcomes that the city wants for the whole community and that all of the community wants as well. So to move forward to the next slide, in terms of a little bit of background for the CAP, we'll hear a little bit more briefly from Julie in a moment. But essentially, this CAP is not sort of the beginning. It is building on a lot of prior work, a really key step, including the 2010 action that was taken to develop a first climate action plan, CAP 2020. And so that CAP really did focus on municipal level actions primarily as sort of with setting its emissions reduction goals. Versus now currently, to go to the next slide, CAP 2030, as we're calling it, this current CAP, is really seeking to move beyond the municipal action. There's still municipal action absolutely included. But in addition, there's also a community-wide vision. And that vision is numerically to achieve a 50% greenhouse gas reduction by 2030. And also to drive a lot of those other positive co-benefits previously mentioned. So CAP 2030 outlines a set of 20 climate action strategies that will support Kingston in achieving this bold vision, and we will get into them in a few minutes. The last contextual piece that I wanted to mention before passing to Julie on the next slide is about the CAP 2030 process. Yes, thank you. So the process of arriving to where we are now has included 3 kind of large buckets. The first is a quantitative look. This includes taking an inventory of greenhouse gases currently and understanding where the city's greenhouse gases are coming from. and then using those to produce a forecast to really think about, okay, based on the current trajectory and understanding of state policies, where are greenhouse gas emissions headed? The next bucket is really around strategy analysis. So this is sort of a look at, we identified key strategies and examples looking at best practices around the country, including a focus in New York State and at Kingston specifically, understanding what its building blocks already are. And so that was kind of the qualitative policy analysis and strategy analysis component, which also folded in the third component here, which is stakeholder and community engagement. So as Julie mentioned, great thanks to Citizens for Local Power, CLP, for conducting several meetings and additional engagements that really informed the selection, analysis of the strategies, and also kind of Kingston's broader efforts in the climate and environmental space. Lastly, the stakeholder and community engagement, in addition to meetings like this one today, also has included engagement from a project advisory committee, the PAC, as Julie mentioned, and they have provided their content expertise as well as their kind of personal experience to ensure that the plan is really grounded in the expertise and the local context of the community. So with that, that sort of takes us through how we've gotten to today in terms of the technical process of the plan development. And to hear more about the much longer process and context around Kingston's leading actions to date, I will pass back to Julie to talk about the climate action progress. Over to you, Julie.
Thanks, Farah. Next slide. So the City of Kingston has been a leader, is currently a leader, and will continue to be a leader in sustainability. And that is because of the conscious effort that we have made for the past 15 years. 15 years ago, we started with environmental education. Virginia, I believe, are you on the other channel? So I'm hearing your translation. I'll keep going. Good? Okay. So at that time, we started with environmental education and also formed the Conservation Advisory Council. The Conservation Advisory Council exists still. It is strong. The chair is on the meeting tonight. And that Conservation Advisory Council was the organization under which the first climate action plan was developed. From there, we built the Climate Smart Kingston Commission, who helps to directly enact the climate action plan. These organizations, in addition to our city's staff and our investment in our own human capital, has allowed us to wake up every day to move forward sustainability initiatives. But we've done so with many different plans. We started with our first climate action plan, then an adaptation plan for sea level rise and flooding, then a natural resources inventory to understand what we have, then an open space plan to understand how we're going to protect those resources. Now our climate action plan. And moving forward, we're funded to write a community preservation plan for how we're going to actually fund the preservation of these assets that we want to protect in our open space plan. But here we are with our climate action plan, our second one. And by now, between the first and the second, as the mayor mentioned, we've become the first city to be certified Silver Climate Smart, which is the highest level achieved by a city. It's the highest level achieved in the state. There's no gold yet, but when there is gold, I hope that we will be the first. We were the first city to be designated as a clean energy community and are still a clean energy community. So much for us to be proud of because of hard work. Next slide. Now this slide has a lot of information on it, but it's here to illustrate the areas that we have focused. Now this is not just the sustainability office that's working on these things, not just the Conservation Advisory Council, not just the Climate Smart Kingston Commission. It's across all municipal departments and throughout the community. This is not just city government. And this next climate action plan also really strives to engage the community as much as possible for transformative, bold change. Till now, we've been working on things like energy, transportation, land use, sustainable resource management, adaptation and resilience, and outreach and education. And each of these things can have and has had a profound effect on so many things related to sustainability. Simple, what seems like something that might just happen overnight to you, is a lot of work for us and incredible things. For instance, changing all of our city streetlights to LED. You might not think twice about it. They are now all efficient. And what was our #2 largest energy demand for the city, that energy draw was cut in half when we switched those lights over. So actions like that are actions that the city has taken. But moving forward, we need to go broader and larger than that to really dramatically reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And so that's why we're here with our Climate Action Plan 2030. Next slide. Farah?
Thanks, Julie. I'll jump in here. But so as a result of all of these amazing achievements that Julie just outlined, coupled with changes and improvements at both the state and the federal level, Kingston has achieved a 32% reduction in total community-wide emissions in 2019. And so just looking at this bar chart, you'll see on the left, representing 2010, total community-wide emissions were about 185,000 metric tons of CO2 about a decade ago. And then you'll see on the right, in 2019, this number has gone down to about 126,000 metric tons of CO2. So that's really great progress. And just to break it down a bit further, there were reductions seen across each main sector of the local economy. So there was a 14% reduction of emissions in the waste sector, a 33% reduction of emissions in the built environment. So that's emissions attributed to residential, commercial, and industrial buildings, and a 31% reduction in emissions in the transportation sector. And each of these sectors is represented by colors on these bars. So waste is represented by this darker green, the built environment by this lighter green/gray, and transportation by this darker blue. So next slide. So while Kingston has made some really great progress on emissions, it's also important to understand the future progress that Kingston is currently positioned to make, to understand how close that will get you to your 2030 target, which is represented on this graphic with this, this yellow bullseye. So to better understand this, the project team forecasted Kingston's future emissions out to 2030 based on 2 potential policy scenarios. So the first policy scenario is the business as usual scenario. This is represented by this blue dotted line. And this essentially projects out Kingston's emissions out through 2030 if no additional action were to be taken at the local level. And under this scenario, emissions are actually projected to increase about 8%, and this would largely be driven by population growth, growth in the labor force, growth in income, et cetera. And in our second policy scenario, which is business as usual with state policies, this is represented by this green dotted line, and similarly projects out Kingston's emissions through 2030, assuming that there's no action at the local level, but does account for state targets outlined in the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, also known as the CLCPA. So this scenario assumes that those targets were either successfully met or are on track to be met. And under this scenario, emissions are expected to decrease by an additional 5%. And so neither of these scenarios is an exact prediction of what Kingston's emissions are going to look like, but they do give us a sense of the direction that Kingston is going in. And they both indicate that there is a need for additional action at the local level to ensure that this 2030 target is met. So next slide. So this brings us to our next section, which is CAP 2030 Climate Action Strategies. Next slide. So as Farah mentioned earlier, this plan, CAP 2030, includes 20 climate action strategies that will help ensure Kingston is able to achieve the deeper reductions necessary to achieve that 2030 target. And these strategies are organized into 4 categories that we will describe a bit more later on. But just for reference, these are clean electricity supply, decarbonized buildings, sustainable mobility and land use, and managing resources sustainably. So next slide. So here are 20 strategies. And in the following slides, we're going to provide a high-level overview of each of the 20 strategies. Just given time, we won't do a super deep dive into each, but we will be covering a strategy description, so explaining what the strategy is, an overview of strategy impact as it relates to greenhouse gas emissions, and 3, information on how the community can participate in each strategy. And the other thing I'll note is that 7 of these strategies in the full report are spotlighted strategies, so a little bit less relevant here, but in the full report, you'll see that there's just a little bit more information, research and analysis that went into these 7, just for reference. The next slide. And so that brings us to our first category, which is clean electricity supply strategies. And so this category includes strategies that will reduce reliance on fossil fuels for electricity by increasing the use of renewables to power homes, buildings, and transportation. And so our 4 strategies are here, but I will pass to Julie to walk us through our first 2.
Great, thank you. And I do want to cover some housekeeping things because we've had a few folks enter since we touched on housekeeping. Welcome everyone to our Climate Action Plan public meeting. If you've just arrived, please make sure you choose your language of your preferred language in the globe on the bottom, English or Spanish. And also, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to type them into the chat. We will be keeping track of those questions. And after each section that we speak about the strategies within that individual kind of bucket, we will address the questions that have come into that area. So please feel free to do that. And I also want to mention, as you are entered into the meeting, you have been entered in as attendees. You are welcome to stay there if you'd like as an attendee. It just means that your name will not pop up on the screen and your video will not be showing. You're welcome to stay in that if you'd like, but you have been asked to become a panelist, which simply means that you can put your face on the screen with all of us if you'd like, or your name at least, and certainly can raise your hand and speak when we're called on. So thank you again, and we will move on to these strategies and then address the questions in the chat after this section. So strategy 1 is to achieve 100% renewable electricity in city operations. As we walk through these strategies, we're going to tell you a little bit about how they're helpful, what their impact is. So if we say that it is a direct emissions reduction, it means that that action itself, by taking the action, emissions will be reduced automatically. If it's indirect, it means it will enable the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions should further action be taken. We also gave it an impact level of low, medium, or high, or something in between, which we'll speak to as we're speaking about each strategy. And we are also going to cover how each of these strategies impacts folks around the city. And we have taken an extreme effort in this process to make sure that we are looking at strategies that can have the broadest impact to the most number of people as we possibly can. And so we'll speak to how we've gotten to that, so that this isn't just a plan for the haves. It's a plan for everyone. It's a plan regardless of your income, regardless of your demographics. And so we will speak to that as we continue through. This first plan, and not all strategies will apply to all sectors, but there is something in this plan for everyone in the community. This particular strategy is one that applies to municipal buildings. So we, the city, have worked with the National Renewable Energy Laboratory and CADMIS to create a roadmap to 100% renewables, to figure out how we as a city can achieve a divestment, pulling away from use of fossil fuels. This strategy addresses that within municipal operations. So by doing things like signing up our municipal accounts for community solar, like installing renewable energy like solar projects on municipal buildings, and other options, we as a city will reduce our emissions by switching to renewable energy. This particular strategy applies to the city, city operations, but with support from and collaboration with Climate Smart Kingston Commission and other folks from the community who would like to help to identify locations for ideal renewable energy installations. Next slide. This action is establishing a community choice aggregation program, or CCA, as we will reference. CCA is a program that we are very excited to be launching with an incredible team that we have been working with. And CCA is a strategy that is new-ish to New York State, but not new to the US and other communities that have moved forward. CCA is when a municipality pools all of our electricity load of our residents and businesses and procures that electricity at a lower rate, and in this case, at a cleaner supply. So our intent is in the next year or so to pool all of the energy accounts of everyone in the city, residents and businesses, regardless of who you are, and provide clean energy at a lower rate. This action alone has the potential, once enacted, to have an incredibly high impact. You will see that it is listed as the highest impact of all of the actions in the strategy, and it has direct emissions reductions. As soon as this goes into effect, we would be switching from the current energy supply to a clean energy supply, reducing emissions greatly. This will apply to all residents, regardless of income, and all businesses. If they're small, they're automatically entered into the system, and if they're large, they would get in by request. And this program itself is so simple that everyone is automatically entered into it. You have to opt out if you do not want to participate. You will be hearing a lot more about this over the next year, but we are very, very excited about CCA. Next slide.
Great, thanks, Julie. So to pick up here, we have a couple of next strategies that are really focused on solar. So the first one here is focused on community solar. The strategy that we have is called Increased Local Participation in Community Solar. This strategy is looking at the city focusing on outreach and coordination to increase awareness of and local participation in the community solar projects. To back up a little bit, community solar involves essentially a local solar PV system being installed within or near the community that residents and businesses can subscribe to. Subscribers then gain access to the clean energy produced by the panels and receive credits towards their electricity bills. And we've classified it as there's a couple of symbols here. We've noted that this is indirect only because the focus, and low only because the focus of the strategy is on the outreach and coordination piece. Certainly community solar overall plays a really important role for the community. Additionally, in addition to the sort of emissions reductions benefits, one really key feature of community solar is that it is quite broadly accessible to most residents, including renters and individuals whose property might not be suitable for rooftop solar, can participate in community solar, which is, again, a really important benefit. To move to the next slide, so strategy 4 is on requiring the installation of solar PV on new construction. So for this strategy, essentially, it's outlining the city establishing a mandate requiring the installation of solar PV on new construction of residential or commercial buildings. Typically, these types of mandates are focused on buildings of a certain size. And of course, the city would take particular care in implementation to ensure that it is done in a cost-effective way that does not financially burden disadvantaged community members. In terms of the impact, it's pretty direct. It's generating new renewable energy that would displace fossil fuels and thereby reduce emissions. It's on the low to medium side just because it's focused on, particularly in the 2030 time horizon, there's only so many new buildings that would likely fall under such a mandate. But again, over time, start to have a really scaled impact. Lastly, in terms of participation, this strategy would be, in terms of its implementation, limited to owners of the new homes and businesses. And so those benefits might be a little bit skewed in terms of where there is sort of uptake on potentially upmarket residents. That being said, again, over time, the benefits that are generated from this strategy really are benefiting the whole community by increasing the renewable energy and connecting back to the environmental and health benefits that would be more broad than a particular building. So to transition us on the next slide to the next segment, we are looking at the next group of strategies that are on decarbonized buildings. So this set of strategies is focusing on reducing reliance on fossil fuels to generate heat and hot water in buildings, predominantly through energy efficiency and the electrification of equipment. So we have 6 strategies, and I will pass back to Julie to start taking us through the first few.
Thank you. And I want to remind folks you can type questions into the chat. And after this section of strategies, we will address the questions so far. So this strategy, number 5, is upgrading municipal buildings and facilities to increase energy efficiency and electrify equipment. This is an action that will have direct emissions reductions with action that will directly divest from fossil fuels and transition to alternative forms of energy. We have been working on this action for several years now and pledged to continue to do so. The picture that you see here is one example of what we've done. This person is installing storm windows in City Hall. That blue cover pulls off. So doing things like storm window insulation, retrofitting our buildings' lighting systems to LED, switching our HVAC heating and ventilation systems to heat pumps. These are all actions that we have taken so far because buildings are so incredibly high in energy demand. We need to make sure we make our buildings as efficient as possible and electrify the equipment that we have so that we are using the cleanest possible source of energy. Since this is only a municipal operation strategy, the impact is not extremely high, but it's an important one for us to proceed with. Next slide. Strategy 6 is increasing utilization of PACE financing. PACE stands for Property Assessed Clean Energy. And the city has participated in PACE financing for several years. It is a system by which right now a commercial organization, whether it is a commercial business or a nonprofit property owner, can have access to funding and incentives to make energy efficiency improvements or install renewable energy on their property. And in doing so, the bills from that effort become part of the property. The bill comes onto the property as opposed to the person itself. So it will stick with the property. If the person moves away, the next property owner is then responsible for those bills. But it is also a funding mechanism and incentives to do so. This is a system that is set up statewide, and we work with the Energy Improvement Corporation, and we hope that this will expand to residential options into the future. But for now, while it is commercial, we need to make a bigger effort to get the word out that this option is available for people to make these improvements. It is an indirect emissions reduction because it will enable the reduction of fossil fuels. It's not a direct reduction. It enables people to do something about it. And as of now, it's had a low impact, but we hope that with more and more folks engaging in this system and this program, we will have a larger impact. Right now, all commercial and nonprofit property owners in the city of Kingston have access to this, and we want to engage as many folks from the community as possible to help move it forward. Next slide. Strategy 7 is adopting benchmark requirements for commercial and multifamily buildings. We as a city have done this already for our own municipal buildings. So benchmarking is when you track and understand your energy use through a system where you then report that to the community and decision makers, and you use that tracking mechanism to understand what your energy use is to set goals and programs for lowering your energy use. By benchmarking, it's knowing what you have. It's an inventory. Right now, every municipal building greater than 1,000 square feet is being benchmarked and has for many years. It's public information how much energy we use. This strategy is to expand that from just municipal buildings to all commercial and multifamily buildings citywide over 25,000 square feet. For example, we will have to determine what the specifics are. That would be a requirement for those size buildings, but of course, any building could benchmark, and we will highly recommend and help folks to benchmark their buildings. This is an indirect emissions reduction because it is enabling a program, but the reduction itself would come from the actions people took once they understand what their use is and move towards reducing it. This again can apply to commercial and multifamily building owners in Kingston. It would by requirement, should we adopt that, but it could apply to any building owner. And we presume this will be enacted by city staff in collaboration with the Climate Smart Kingston Commission with community partners. Next slide.
All right, so the next strategy, strategy 8, is to provide educational and workforce clean tech opportunities. So as part of this strategy, the city would collaborate with local organizations to expand the Empower Kingston Green Jobs Apprenticeship Program and the Green Careers Program at SUNY Ulster. And as part of this, the city would also leverage existing NYSERDA workforce development programs and resources. And so overall, the strategy is expected to have a somewhat indirect impact on emissions. It won't immediately result in emissions reductions, but investing in Kingston's clean tech workforce now will be key to ensuring that the city has the labor and the resources that it needs to implement other strategies that will have deeper emissions reductions in the long term. And then lastly, in terms of participation, workforce development opportunities would likely be open to the community at large, but there could be efforts to target these opportunities towards more specific groups such as LMI community members or individuals employed in an industry that is expected to be impacted by the transition to a decarbonized economy. So next slide. So strategy 9 is to increase local utilization of existing incentives to electrify equipment and appliances in homes and businesses. So this would largely involve the city collaborating with community organizations to drive increased participation in existing incentive programs for electric appliances such as air source heat pumps and ground source heat pumps. So existing programs such as those offered through Central Hudson or future group purchase campaigns, also known as Heat Smart campaigns. And this strategy is important because increasing the awareness and the adoption of these existing incentives will increase the uptake of electric appliances that are powered with an increasingly clean electricity supply, and therefore will help reduce reliance on fossil fuels for heating and hot water over the long term. And most community members would be eligible to participate since there are existing incentives for most electrification appliances in most building sectors, and there are additional incentives available to provide increased support to LMI community members. But if you are interested in learning more about the wide array of incentives, I would encourage you to just take a look at the report because we have included links somewhere to find more information. All right, and next slide. So similar to the previous strategy, strategy 10 involves the city collaborating with community organizations to drive community participation in existing NYSERDA and Central Hudson incentives for energy efficiency improvements in homes and businesses. Also similar to the previous strategy, it has a somewhat more indirect impact on emissions, but does play an important role by driving the uptake of energy efficiency measures that will reduce overall energy consumption and therefore reduce emissions. And most Kingston residents and businesses, again, would be eligible to receive these existing incentives. There's a wide range of incentives available for different income levels, for different building types, for different measures pursued, but again, could please take a look at the full report if you would like to learn more about these incentives. And so next slide, but I think it sounds like we want to pause here for some questions.
Great. And I believe that there's been several questions that have come in. So what we're going to try to do is to charge through as many as we can, mostly in the order that we've received them. So to start off, there was a question that read, how does this plan address equity? So to that end, there's a couple of ways that it does. The first is that particularly for the spotlighted strategies, many of which are sort of newer efforts, broadly speaking, not always completely true. So for a lot of these, we've looked at having a specific component on participation, and that at least gets at some components of equity around ensuring that we are explicitly discussing who all can participate, and a lot of times that has attention to how to make that as broad as possible. Additionally, there's frequently equity considerations baked into the implementation steps section of a lot of the spotlighted strategies. And I know that equity has been an ongoing value for the city for a long time, so there's sort of that lens that's baked in kind of in a broader way throughout. Next, on the next one that I'll pass to my colleague on is on vehicle emissions. So I'll pass to Megan to read that question and provide some thoughts.
Sure, so the question is, how were emissions from gas vehicles measured? Are those changes from the change of city vehicles to electric or from changes in community? So I think I'm answering this, but essentially the reductions in the transportation sector account for community-wide shifts to electric vehicles, but also account for overall improvements in vehicle efficiency, as well as some reductions in vehicle miles traveled across the community.
Great. The next question that we have states that the plan mentions the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, or CLCPA, and have the CAP goals been linked to the CLCPA? So as mentioned at the start during the discussion on the projections and goals, yes, we did include a look at the CLCPA, and that did, of course, impact the review of the state policy scenario. And it was also a reference for how the city saw what its role could be when it came time to think about the strategies. So yes, great question. Very important to be mindful of city context. There was a next question that came in on organic waste diversion. We will address that question in the next sort of pause, because that will kind of come after we've had a chance to describe the overview of that strategy, so that others who might not have had a chance to read that strategy will also be able to benefit from the answer there. The next question that we have, Julie, I think we will look for some of your thoughts on this, although it relates to community solar, just given that it's connecting to some of the local existing efforts. So would be curious about your thoughts to weigh in there. And that question is, what is the most immediate or best path to tapping into community solar? Solarize Kingston, Solarize Ulster, or the CCA? And so multiple of these efforts are sort of referenced and part of the thinking, but we'll pass to Julie for any immediate reaction.
Sure, thank you. So right now, if you would like to participate in switching your home or business to renewable energy, you have several options, but both Solarize Kingston and Solarize Ulster are programs that are active right now where you can participate in community solar and receive discounts on your bills. And that will go on for a while longer. You can sign up for that on the website if you Google Solarize Kingston or Solarize Ulster. With CCA, when we shift to CCA for the City of Kingston, without going into all of the details, the program itself is one in which we will set it up so that first, it will be an opt-out system, so that by default, all residents and small businesses will become part of this system. And then by default, will have their energy supply coming from 100% renewable energy. In order to do that, our system will be looking to purchase from energy suppliers that are producing renewable energy, and or look to use local energy production, community distributed generation, where homes can put solar on their homes, and that can help to provide the source of energy. And we will diversify lots of options for where our energy will come from. Also with CCA, our plan is to use that mechanism to help the community invest in energy efficiency and renewable energy production as part of that mechanism. So there are other options. You can also purchase solar for your home through a provider. You can, we encourage everyone to reduce energy use in the first place through energy efficiency before you slap solar on your roof. There's lots of different solutions, but right now there are many, many different options. And if you would like to speak about the difference between them, please feel free to reach out to me at any time. And my contact information will be at the end of this presentation.
Great. And then I believe that we have a question that has come in on benchmarking. I can read this one out loud again before passing back to you, Julie. That question is, how will benchmarking requirements be implemented? Would that be through the city code, or would it be administered?
So I'm going to answer that. Thanks, Farah. I'm going to answer that question the way I would answer quite a few questions, in that this plan is outlining the what we need to do, and how we are going to do it still needs to be determined. So we would like to achieve these goals and reduce our emissions 50% by 2030. These are strategies of what we need to do. How that actually happens with legislation, with policy, with mandates, with incentives, the actual mechanisms we will determine in an implementation plan to follow. So I can't sit here and say with certainty how each of these will exactly move forward. I do know some of them, but not all of them. And so for that one, I sort of need to say we have to wait and see. But we have lots of best practices for each of the strategies that we are drawing from other communities. I see, Susan, you have a hand up. Did you want to chime in on something?
Oh, I did, yes. Thank you, Julie. Susan Gillespie. I'm active with Citizens for Local Power and also with a new nonprofit called Mid-Hudson Energy Transition. And I wanted, first of all, to congratulate you for the, and Cadmus for the emphasis on energy efficiency. Not everybody sees how important that is. And it's important because it saves the use of energy, some of which is undoubtedly, you know, since it comes from the utility, not 100% green at the moment, but also makes people's homes healthier and more comfortable and help them save money on their utility bills. So that's a great focus to have. And I'm glad also particularly to see it in connection with CCA. CCA can be a great platform for those kinds of, encourage those kinds of improvements for people and help them with funding, et cetera. But one other point for clarity, and I think also in response to a question earlier that you answered, I think quite completely, but there was Lisa's question, but I had one more point which is that as a CCA, Kingston can also sign up solar developers to create community solar that will be part of the CCA offerings. And that's a great way to actually guarantee that people's bills will go down. So you're not just going out on the market to buy energy, which should be greener and cheaper than what they're getting now from Central Hudson, but it will be guaranteed cheaper and guaranteed local and guaranteed clean by including opt-out community solar in the CCA. So that's a great opportunity.
Thank you, Susan. And thank you to CLP for all the work that you've done for this process. Okay, Farah?
Great. And then I think we have just a couple of, Julie, by passing back to me, you're intending to let us hit through these last couple of questions that came through, correct?
Yes.
Okay, great. So yes, we have a couple more, and I think Megan will cover both of these. I will read the first one out loud. That is that we have been trying to get our home off of oil and onto heat pumps, but it is prohibitively expensive. The only incentive we've found has been through Central Hudson, and those have been volatile. Apart from financing, are there actually grants or subsidies available to help lower to middle income households to make the leap?
Sure, thanks, Farah. And so I would note that there are a broader array of incentives available also through NYSERDA. I'm not sure of this exact scenario just off the top of my head, but I would suggest looking at the plan for the links for the more information there. I would also note that there are some economic barriers to heat pumps right now. Incentives will help, but something else we did mention in the plan is just the potential for heat pumps and electric appliances to become more cost effective over time as the cost of natural gas increases over time, in part potentially due to climate legislation and things like that.
Great. And then the last one that we will take for now, again, we'll try to address more questions at the end, is to explain where, the major emission reductions took place in each sector. Very curious in particular about how vehicle miles traveled, VMT, was measured in 2010 and 2019.
Sure, so I can take a stab at this. In terms of emissions reductions, there was a wide range of contributing factors, including the efforts at the local level. Additionally, there were shifts from coal to natural gas in the electricity generation mix, improvements in vehicle efficiency, improvements in building efficiency. Our modeling team wasn't able to join today, so I can't speak to their exact process for measuring VMT in both 2010 and 2019, but can follow up on this. And I will note that we will have an additional appendix in the final CAP draft that will speak a bit more to our methodology.
Great. So with that, we will charge ahead in the interest of ensuring we can at least touch upon the remaining strategies.
Sorry, that's me. So our next category is sustainable mobility and land use strategies. And this category includes strategies that will reduce emissions from the transportation sector by reducing reliance on vehicles, encouraging alternative forms of transportation, and replacing internal combustion vehicles with EVs. And I will pass to Julie to walk through the first few.
Thank you. So a principle that is really important to us in this process is that right now in the city of Kingston, we are extremely reliant on individual people driving individual vehicles. We are very heavily reliant on single occupancy vehicles in this city, not unlike many others. And so with these strategies and many others, we are doing what we can, or proposing to do what we can, to reduce the impacts from transportation in a number of different ways. This specific strategy, number 11, speaks to the city's vehicular impact on emissions. So we have been working on transitioning our city fleet to all electric vehicles for many years. At this point, the city of Kingston has about 170 municipal vehicles, and that includes sedans that administrative staff drive, pickup trucks, dump trucks, fire trucks, garbage packers, excavators, backhoes, lawn mowers, many different things. Many of those things don't have commercially available and reasonably priced alternatives. So right now we are not going to go out and buy an electric fire engine or an electric garbage truck. That's just not a thing for us right now. But at this point, all of our sedans could have an opportunity to be shifted over. Oh, and also all, I didn't mention in the fleet, all of our police vehicles. So some of these vehicles have readily accessible options for alternatives and others don't. Our commitment is to transition our fleet for all vehicles that have reasonably priced and accessible alternative options by 2030. And in order to do so, we will have direct emissions reductions by eliminating the use of gas and or diesel, but it will have a low to medium impact as it will only be applicable to municipal vehicles. But this would apply to any vehicle in the city that is not already transitioned that has an alternative. Next slide. In order to enable folks to shift to electric vehicles, we need to have the infrastructure in place. Now, I want to mention that I'm not sitting here and saying that electric vehicles are the solution. That is one of a cadre of options that we are using to transition folks away from using single occupancy gas powered vehicles. If you're going to drive a single occupancy vehicle, at least drive an electric one. If you're not going to drive a vehicle, use a bus, walk, bike, and we'll talk about that next. But at least if you're going to keep using a vehicle, we are promoting the shift to electric. And we have continued to do so. We've already been doing so for years now. Around the city of Kingston, you will notice we have electric vehicle infrastructure installed on municipal property for no cost to the community to incentivize residents and visitors to shift towards electric vehicles if they're using a vehicle. So just this past month, I applied for 4 more locations around the city to install electric vehicles. The infrastructure itself is an indirect action because the shift to the vehicle itself is the direct action. But it has an incredible impact because people will not shift towards electric vehicles if they don't have a place to safely plug in. So we are committed to providing that location. And so this will apply to anyone who is who would be an electric vehicle driver. Next slide. As I mentioned, not everyone will buy an electric vehicle or lease one, and not everyone can, but we can provide other options like public transportation. The City of Kingston does not manage our local bus system any longer. That is in the hands of Ulster County Area Transit, or UCAT. But the City of Kingston can have an incredible influence on how that system works. We are the county seat. We have the services. We have the people who want and need bus transportation. And so by helping work with the county to increase and improve bus routes, to make it reliable and reasonable, to work with students in the school district to get kids around to work and to school, to work with the Complete Streets Advisory Council and Climate Smart Kingston and other commissions to understand where are we missing service, where can we improve, and how can we increase ridership. But most importantly, right now in the City of Kingston, the default is that everyone drives their own vehicle. We need the default to be a shift in culture towards there are other options like a bus ride or walking or biking. So this action will apply to anyone who could ever or would ever want to ride a bus. Next, please. And so the third piece of this puzzle here, the third arm of the chair, is increasing walkability and bikeability. This is not new. And I should have mentioned from the beginning that many of these strategies are not something totally new. Some of them are, and some of them are not. But they made it into this plan because we valued their impact. This administration has valued walkability and bikeability in the city. That is evident by the infrastructure that you see out the window with new bike lanes and more walkable streets, better improvements in sidewalks and crosswalks, additional trails and a trail system, the green line system. There's so much that has been done with many, many partners. And you can see those here, like Friendly Kingston, the Land Trust, Complete Streets. There's so many organizations that are working towards this, but we have to continue to advance so that, again, the default needs to be that you're not automatically thinking you need to take a vehicle to get everywhere around the city. We don't live in a big town. We are pretty compact, and we will continue to commit to increased walkability and bikeability. This will impact every single person in the city, and we hope that everyone will participate in continuing with the trajectory that we are on. Next slide. Pass it over to Cadmus. Nope, I'll stick with me. So we are in the midst, as we speak, of rezoning our city. If you are around town, you may know that this has been Charrette Week for Kingston Forward. Kingston Forward is an initiative that the city has invested in, an incredible investment to redo our zoning code. And we have employed Dover Cole and partners to re-envision our zoning system. This plan and this strategy identifies particular to zoning that an effort that can be accomplished through zoning includes things like smart growth, where you put your buildings in relationship to other things. We were talking today, we had a meeting just before this, an environment-focused meeting about zoning, about how even where you put the parking in relation to the building can encourage people to walk versus drive. There can be zoning related to urban agriculture, related to green infrastructure, related to so many different things. And the zoning code can really rewrite how we function as a municipality in a more sustainable way. So this is in the works, but everyone needs to be involved to help to move forward the zoning, and the zoning itself can really have an incredible impact on our on our emissions, more than I've even known before I got involved in this process. So I encourage everyone to participate in the zoning process, which is still ongoing for the next couple of days for the community input. On Wednesday night at 6 p.m., there is a public meeting at City Hall and on Zoom where you can see how things have progressed thus far in the last week and provide input and really reach out about the environmental changes that you'd like to see that can be modified with zoning. Next slide. This is a strategy that is a little polarizing in the city of Kingston, but we would be remiss if we didn't include it here as something to at least evaluate. And that is implementing dockless bike and or scooter programs. I did work with Columbia University for one semester with a group of students to evaluate how effective this would be in a city like Kingston. And we would need certainly further evaluation, but at the crux of the principle of what this program would do is it would get people out of a gas guzzling vehicle and into an effective mode of transportation. Not an equivalent, I'm not saying it's equivalent, but it is a way to get around. So this is something that we will explore more. There's many communities that do this, and perhaps we will as well into the future. Next slide.
All right, and I can jump in here. Strategy 17, which has a somewhat long name, is really focused on requiring newly constructed commercial and multifamily buildings to install a minimum percentage of parking spots in lots with electric vehicle chargers. And it also focuses on streamlining the permitting process to ensure that this is a straightforward process. In terms of impact on emissions, it's somewhat indirect, but the availability of charging infrastructure can be a barrier to EV adoption. So this strategy plays a key role in reducing that barrier and increasing reliance on EVs, which will reduce overall emissions in the transportation sector. And in terms of participation, building owners are expected to bear the responsibility of implementing any specific requirements, but the full community is expected to benefit from increased access to EV charging, which can be especially helpful for renters who might not otherwise have access to home charging. And next slide. So just introducing our final category, which is managing resources sustainably. This category includes strategies that will reduce emissions associated with food production, consumption, and waste disposal, and also includes a strategy focused on utilizing land to effectively sequester carbon. So back to you, Julie.
Thanks. So for the past 3 years, I have been working with the Hudson Valley Regional Council to develop an organics diversion plan for the city of Kingston, which means we have been auditing our waste stream, auditing our production of waste at events and in municipal buildings to understand what food waste we can divert from our waste stream. About 30% of the waste that we produce is able to be diverted instead of being sent to the landfill 350 miles away. And so this organics diversion plan, which will be completed by December of this year, will have a strategy for how the city can collect compost citywide, perhaps curbside, how we can collect compost at municipal events and in buildings. And it will have an incredible impact because we will be preventing all of that waste from going to the landfill, making a clean product of compost, reducing fossil fuel emissions from transportation of solid waste. And it would impact every single person in the city of Kingston. So we look forward to rolling that plan out, and there'll be a public meeting about that when it is complete. Next slide. This number 19, sequestering carbon through the preservation and expansion of the urban forest, directly calls on the enacting of our open space plan. The open space plan specifically outlines a vision for preservation of open space, for expansion of our urban canopy, tree canopy, for planting of additional trees. And this helps this strategy recommends that we take that as seriously as we can to make direct action related to that. And that will be a community-wide effort with lots of different funding mechanisms that will need to be developed and community collaboration in order to ensure the preservation and expansion of our current urban forest. Next slide.
Thanks, Julie. So to wrap up the last strategy here, this strategy is on increasing local participation in community gardens. And so that includes both at the public and private lands aspects. What this, I think I will move on. Was just hearing someone from a moment there. In terms of impacts, this strategy generates impacts by decreasing the number of miles traveled between the site of food production and the ultimate consumer. There's also additional emissions reductions that are generated by minimizing the need for food refrigeration and reducing the energy usage associated with packaging, which is very common in large-scale food production and distribution. In terms of other types of benefits, this strategy will also increase the concentration of local vegetation and improved soil health, both of which naturally sequester carbon. Finally, in terms of participation, this strategy is definitely one that there's a very open approach to. All residents can certainly participate in community gardens, looking at particularly those that are on public lands, while private lands, community gardens that are based on private lands would inherently be limited to the owners or tenants of that land. The city could actually be active in strategically selecting private partners that would choose to collectively enable more equitable access to the community gardens. So there is a role for the city, even with private partners there. So with that, that takes us through all of the strategies. What we will do now, we do have a few minutes to take questions, but what we'll do to ensure that everyone's clear on next steps is just briefly touch upon what those next steps are, and then we will come back for questions. So following this meeting today, you can feel free to send additional feedback and thoughts. And as mentioned at the outset, that's very much the goal. The city welcomes your thoughts. You can do that in two ways. The first is through Engage Kingston, the CAP 2030 webpage, or you can email Julie directly, and her email address is listed here on the slide. This feedback period will be completely open for the next 2 weeks. So any feedback that we have by Monday, November 22nd, we will review closely and incorporate to the degree possible. And all of that will be reviewed and incorporated in the next and the final draft, which is expected to be released by December. Julie, anything to add here, or should we go to questions?
I will just say that after this plan is completed, we plan to bring it to the Common Council at the beginning of the year for formal adoption, as we did for our first climate action plan. Now we have just a few moments left, and I want to address a few of these questions, that have come through in the chat. And please know that if we don't get to your question tonight, please communicate with me. We will continue to follow up with you. And we really, really are looking for input on the draft plan. This is a draft. This is not the final. So there was a question about, will the implementation of the plan address the changing of norms and behavior change in order to achieve the goals? That is our hope. We know that it is very difficult to change a culture. We also know that we need to try, and that is why we are here, and we are passionate about it. And we have led by example, and we have engaged the community, and we will continue to engage the community from all directions so that everyone feels included and no one is left out. And that means making sure that all these strategies are accessible, and we commit to doing that. Ultimately, we hope that this will be transformative. I can't guarantee anything, but we can at least try. How do we petition for sidewalks? That is a question that I don't actually really know an answer to. I think that you could follow up. We have an active pedestrian bicycle master plan that is being developed. And if you engage with that process, which you can also find on Engage Kingston, that pedestrian bicycle master plan will outline the new strategy and infrastructure for building crosswalks and sidewalks and bicycle infrastructure. And I think that that is the best way to move through that process for advocating for sidewalks. Question is, besides organic waste diversion, are there other high impact materials management actions that were considered? This process and this climate action plan is 20 actions that we landed on to focus on for a concrete climate action plan moving forward. However, we know that this is by no means all solutions. This is what we're committing to, but we also know that there are many other things that community groups and even my office and other offices within the city will be moving forward that are not listed in this plan. And so yes, we have multiple strategies for solid waste management, but this plan specifically outlines organics. I'll take another question here that applies to me is, what will it take for citywide curbside organics collection to go from plan to actuality? If you ask me the truth, it's going to happen. It is. We have to do it. There's a mandate for large businesses. Ultimately, there will be mandates for residents, just like recycling wasn't mandatory in the beginning and it is now. Organics will be mandatory. This administration values the diversion of organics materials, and we will make it happen. We will figure out how to do it, either starting as a pilot or doing it citywide. We will find funding to make it happen. If you support it, reach out to the mayor's office and tell him that you support it. The more support we have, the better. I don't think we're going to need to hear a lot about the community from support, but the more the support, the better. I think those are the questions I needed to answer.
Thanks, Julie. I can jump in on the one that Cadmus was going to respond to. So one other question was related to strategy 12, I think. Was it considered to require existing multifamily homes to put in EV charging with a longer term deadline, such as 2030? So we did talk about this. I think we ultimately landed on new commercial and multifamily buildings just because it's less of an economic burden on building owners and the potential for an economic burden to not be passed on to renters. But as the community moves forward into the implementation phase, they could consider expanding this strategy to include existing buildings as well.
Okay, well, I think that we have gotten through most of the questions that we've seen. I want to thank everyone for attending tonight. I want to encourage you to reach out to me and to look at the climate action plan draft. Send me comments. I take critiques very easily. We all do here. We will address anything that you send over and consider it. Also, if this work is something you would like to be involved in, the Climate Smart Kingston Commission has vacancies. The Conservation Advisory Council has vacancies. We would welcome you to participate either as an active member or in any of the work that we're doing. You can follow the work that we do at our sustainability page on the city's website. And we look forward to putting out our final climate action plan at the end of the year. So if there are any other questions, I want to thank our live interpretation. I want to thank Cadmus, CLP. I see there's a question from Kristen. Go ahead.
Hi, I was just wondering, can you say again when you're receiving comments until?
November 22nd.
Okay.
All right. Well, with that, I would like to wish everyone a good night and see you next time.